Hi, I wanted to provide some notes for how to write some of the different sections of the analysis essay. Now, I've put these full PowerPoint notes up on the Blackboard site, and they actually are going to cover a lot more in the slideshow that I post on Blackboard than what I talk about here. I have a 15-minute time limit. I got to be careful about that. So I just want to go through a couple of the more kind of complex parts. The other sections on the PowerPoint should be pretty straightforward just to read, but obviously if you have any questions, you can let me know through email. So when it comes to your introduction for the analysis essay should be fairly simple. I just need to know a couple of things. We need to know, basic background information about the text. Kind of give a little bit of a sense of what's going on when this text is written. Some of that you might be able to ascertain from the text itself. Some of the texts have a little helpful note. They give you a little bit of information about when it was written, and you might just kind of have to explain or fill in the blanks a little bit yourself. But regardless, try and provide a brief little bit of background information as to why the writing or speech was created, why it was written, why it was spoken. And then what is required is that you should provide some information about the argument or main points, and obviously make sure that the author's name is included in there as well. Other options, as you can see there, you can provide a little bit more information about the date in which it was written, the situation that was occurring before the text was composed, and biography information about the author. That's your choice. Don't feel like you have to go too in-depth with that. And then the thesis statement should be placed as the last sentence of the introduction paragraph. Now, when it gets into the actual body paragraphs, then there are a couple of different things, and I wanted to provide you some examples for those things using the Martin Luther King example that I used in the last set of notes. So as you can see here, when it comes to purpose analysis, you're really putting it into your own words. Try and think very carefully about why it is that this person will be writing this. What are they hoping to accomplish? How does that fit in with the situation as you've tried to identify it? It does not have to be quite as detailed as this example that I have here. My goal with these examples is to provide very full detailed models, but I'm not expecting this, certainly not as a baseline for what you have to accomplish, just what's possible. So you might only have a few sentences for this. A lot of times people complete their purpose analysis and audience analysis in the same paragraph. Speaking of audience analysis, here we go. The audience analysis, again, you're just trying to figure out what are some of the audiences, that could be addressed in the text that you're analyzing. Sometimes it'll be clearly stated, it'll be pretty obvious based off of the way that people are addressed, that they say could also be the audience. If they introduce any opponents or anything like that, they could be refuting them, they could be talking to them. Other times you'll just have to read in between the lines, and it's very possible that a text is going to have multiple audiences. So feel free to list as many as you feel are sensible or applicable for the text that you have chosen. That is going to vary from text to text. Now, the meat of this essay definitely comes from the appeals, the Aristotelian appeals of logos, pathos, and ethos, or emotional appeal, logical appeal, and credibility appeal. Now, the thing to remind yourself about is just that we don't want to just look for facts, emotions, and credibility appeals kind of in isolation, right? They always have a purpose, and the purpose is to make the person do or believe whatever it is that the author of the text wants them to do or believe. So you need to think about logic, you need to think about emotion and credibility fully in that context, right? It's all about believing them because of, this fact is very convincing and it convinces them of the ultimate purpose, right? It goes back to the purpose idea. And then, of course, you do have to think about the audience, because certain audiences are going to believe things differently than other audiences. Think about all that stuff as you explain it. So don't just pick out a particular fact in an essay and say, oh, well, this must be an appeal to logic because it's a fact, right? Well, it's only an appeal to logic or an appeal to logos if it is proving the main or a minor point. Same thing with the emotion. It might be something sad, but if it's only something sad without any connection to the main point of the article, then it's not really an appeal to emotion. So just think about that. It's only an appeal to whatever you say it is if it supports or, fulfills the author's position or purpose. So just be careful about that. Now, how to write this stuff, it's not hard. In fact, you might kind of buckle under this a little bit because it might be a little bit repetitive, but in truth, there's a very simple formula to follow for your body paragraphs about the appeals that you want to kind of follow with this too. And I say it's the same as the last essay because really what you're doing with any of these essays is you're going to start off with some sort of topic sentence, you're going to give me an example of something, you're going to then explain it. And in this essay, it's a little bit different. You're going to quote something and then, analyze it. And so I break that down into a couple of different pieces just for precision's sake. So you have the topic sentence, which should connect back to the thesis. A very clear, sensible topic sentence for a paper like this is usually something like if I were doing it over the Martin Luther King, it would be something very simple like Martin Luther King uses a lot of appeals to logical appeal. Or, sorry, I got that mixed up. He uses a lot of logical appeals, period. End of the topic sentence. Then I would go into my example. For example, one example of logical appeal is where King says, and then I'll have some examples of that on the next slide. But so I would state the example, quoting it from the reading selection. Then I would define it. This is clearly blank. This is clearly logical appeal because it is a definition about just and unjust laws. Then I would need to examine it, analyze it more carefully. It would make sense to use this logical appeal because it does something. It proves a particular point. It makes someone feel bad about something, right? If it's an appeal to emotion, it makes someone trust the author in a certain way. You explain it depending on what the different type of appeal is, but make sure that you have those three components: the example, the definition, where you clearly state what type of example or what type of appeal it is and how you know it's that type of appeal, and then you analyze it. It makes sense to use this type of appeal because it's going to make the people feel more supportive because they'll feel upset about the injustice that's been done, or they'll feel afraid of what's coming in the future, or something like that. Make sure that you explain why this author would want to use this type of appeal in this way. Then you transition, and you might do that a couple of times per paragraph, as many times as you need in a particular paragraph. So then we have a couple of examples. For the sake of time, I won't go over these too in-depth, but I will just point out that, I have all of my parts here, right? I don't know if you can see my cursor. I believe you can. I believe Screencast-O-Matic shows it. So we got the example here. That's the first, couple of sentences. Then after the citation, that's the definition. This is an example of logical appeal because it's a carefully explained definition of just and unjust laws. And then the last sentence is my analysis of why King would want to do that. Notice how I phrase it all. It's in very objective terms, which I think comes up in another slide, so I won't get ahead. And you'll also notice this is just part of a paragraph. I would ideally have, 2 examples of logical appeal, or maybe even 3 or more if I want to make an important point about how many logical examples King has, or how logical I think he's being. Now, if you don't have a lot of examples, that's okay. That happens sometimes too. And you might need to explain why you think that is, but if you have a lot of them, make sure that you're mentioning them. You don't have to mention all of them. Definitely not. But just mention enough that it feels like you're giving a good sense of the different types of examples that are present. Same thing for emotional appeal. You can see I just kind of, you describe it in different ways. It's very emotional because of the use of justice and injustice. Deeper content, and then I explain what the emotion is. Just a part of the paragraph. And then same thing for credibility. One thing you should also note is that as you're kind of like quoting and analyzing, the quotes themselves are relatively short in the paragraph, right? Where we're talking, about 2.5 lines, about 2 lines, I guess, since it starts in the middle, of quote, and then 2 or 3 times worth of analysis for that. Now, again, I kind of went overboard with that because I want to provide a very detailed, thorough example, but it is something you should consider that, if you've got a big lengthy quotation and you want to explain all of the logic in there, that analysis should be pretty long. It should take longer than just one sentence to, distill all of that down, that big, 3-4 line quotation down to just like, oh, well, this was proving a point he made. It probably bears a little bit more explanation. requires a little more explanation. Okay, and I believe I alluded to this before. Analysis always has to be objective in a paper like this, right? It's not going to do well to have a very opinionated analysis. I like this passage because this was a passage that really connected to me because I also have gone through a similar thing, and then you go off on telling this strange story. These are the types of things I've gotten in the past, so I don't want you to do that. Make sure that you're just explaining how everything works or how it is effective. You know, really try and put yourself in the shoes of the author and say, here's what they were going for, or here's what it seems like they were going for. You don't have to relate it back to, oh, well, this was effective because it really affected me. That's not going to be effective. That's just going to feel like your opinion. You've got to be careful that nobody can come away and say, oh, that's just your opinion, man. And then I already mentioned this too, the analysis part, it equals or exceeds the quote that it's analyzing. And this is my little joke here. It's not meant to be as sarcastic as it might come across. That's why the assignment is not called the quoting essay. It's called the analysis essay. If you analyze and explain things all the way out, you only need a few quotations per paragraph. And then just avoid huge block quotations. Stick to short passages and individual sentences whenever possible. Summarize and paraphrase the rest if necessary. Okay, for your conclusion, people have asked me this in the past. You want to make sure to restate your thesis, but that really is only going to take probably about a sentence. Don't try to stretch that out. Then you have some other options. You can evaluate kind of the entire reading selection. You know, whether you thought it was good, bad. You know, again, don't do that in the body paragraphs. Don't say, oh, well, you know, King really did a great job on this. You know, you could say that in the conclusion if you needed to. Explain a little reflectively why you think that this was good or bad, you know, how this mixture of appeals was appropriate. And then, you know, you can kind of think about it maybe in a hypothetical situation. What would the reading be like if the writer tried to do things a little differently? You know, if you think that they could have used a little bit more emotion, what would that have looked like? Or you could just kind of, you know, kind of forecast ahead what's happened since this writing. You guys have some more current ones than mine about Martin Luther King, so you won't necessarily be talking about, oh man, so much has changed since 2014, although a lot has changed since 2014, but you get the idea. You have a lot of options as far as that goes. Alright, and this is an example of the works cited, but I don't think I need to go into too much detail. Feel free to use this template. You guys have been doing a good job with this as far as like reading, reflecting, responses go, but we'll just kind of leave it up there. That's all I've got for this little talk. I hope it was helpful. I know I went through things pretty quickly.